There is a version of you that exists on the other side of comfort. You have felt it before, in brief, accidental moments. The run you did not think you could finish. The deadline you did not think you could meet. The loss you did not think you could survive, and did. In those moments, something in you that you did not know was there stood up and did what needed to be done. And then, when it was over, you went back to sleep. Back to the version of yourself that negotiates with difficulty, that looks for the exit before the discomfort has even fully arrived. Most people live their entire lives without ever meeting the version of themselves that showed up in that one hard moment. They assume it was a fluke, an emergency response, not who they really are. This audiobook exists to correct that assumption, because the person who showed up in your hardest moment was not a fluke. It was the truest version of you, the one built for something your comfortable life has never required of you. And the tragedy is not that this version of you is rare. The tragedy is that you have access to it every single day, and you have been trained by a culture built entirely around comfort and convenience to never call on it unless an emergency forces your hand. This audiobook is about learning to call on it voluntarily, deliberately, daily. Not because your life requires constant crisis, but because the person who can access that version of themselves on command, rather than only under duress, lives an entirely different life than the person who cannot. There is a specific mental technique we will cover near the middle of this audiobook. A technique so simple, it sounds almost too basic to matter, and so effective that once you understand it, you will recognize it as the actual mechanism behind every act of extraordinary human endurance you have ever witnessed or heard about. Hold on to that. But first, we need to talk honestly about something almost no one wants to hear. The voice in your head that tells you you have reached your limit is lying to you. Almost every single time. Chapter 1. The 40% Rule. There is a phenomenon observed independently across exercise physiology, military training research, and clinical studies of human endurance that reveals something most people go their entire lives never discovering about themselves. When the mind believes the body has reached its absolute limit, when every signal available to consciousness insists that continuing is simply not possible, the body, in objective physiological terms, has typically used somewhere between 30 and 40% of its actual capacity. This is not a motivational exaggeration. It is a measurable finding. The brain, evolved over millions of years in an environment where catastrophic injury was a genuine and constant threat, developed what researchers call a governor, a built-in safety mechanism that triggers the sensation of total exhaustion long before the body has actually approached its true physiological limit. This governor is not malfunctioning. It served an ancient purpose. An early human who pushed to true, complete physical failure while hunting or fleeing a predator risked death from the exertion itself. The governor prevented this. It ensured that a wide margin of safety was always maintained between what a person felt capable of and what they were actually capable of. But here is the problem this ancient safety mechanism creates in a modern context. You are not being hunted by predators. You are not routinely in situations where the ancient margin of safety is protecting you from actual catastrophic harm. And yet the governor still fires, at the same threshold, with the same conviction. Whether you are fighting for your life or simply trying to finish a difficult workout, push through a hard conversation, or complete a task your mind has decided is too exhausting to continue, The voice that says, "I cannot do this," is, in the vast majority of modern circumstances, not reporting an accurate physical limit. It is reporting a conservative, ancient estimate designed for a world that no longer exists in the form your body still believes it does. This single insight, properly understood, changes the entire relationship a person can have with their own perceived limitations. The 40% rule does not mean that limits do not exist. It means that the limit your mind reports first is almost never the limit that is actually there. And the space between those two limits, between what you believe you can do and what you can actually do, is where an entire different life becomes available. Chapter 2. The Accounting of Self-Deception. Before the body can be trained, something else must be examined first. Because most people do not have an accurate relationship with their own history. They have a curated one, a version of their past, edited, consciously and unconsciously, to remove the moments that do not fit the story they have decided to tell about who they are. This is what I call the accounting of self-deception, the specific, honest practice of returning to your own history and removing the edits. Not to punish yourself, to see clearly. Most people who feel stuck, who feel that they have underperformed relative to what they were capable of, are not actually lacking capability. They are lacking an honest accounting of exactly where and how they have consistently let themselves off the hook. The moment you quit that, you told yourself was reasonable. The effort you claimed was full that you knew, somewhere honest inside you, was not. The goal you abandoned and quietly rewrote the story of, so that abandoning it looked like wisdom rather than what it actually was. This is not about shame. Shame produces avoidance, not change. This is about precision. The specific, unflinching precision of a person who has decided that an accurate accounting is more valuable than a comfortable one. Take an honest inventory, not of your failures in general, of the specific moments where you had more available than you gave, where the excuse arrived before the genuine limit did, where you decided the story of your own weakness before you had actually tested whether the weakness was real. This inventory is uncomfortable. It is supposed to be. Because the discomfort of seeing clearly is the price of admission to the only kind of change that actually holds. Not the change built on motivational inspiration, which fades by the following Tuesday. The change built on an accurate, unflinching relationship with exactly who you have been, and exactly what that means about who you are capable of becoming. Chapter 3. Callusing the Mind. There is a concept that changes everything about how difficulty can be approached. The mind, like the body, can be calloused. Physical callusing is a familiar concept. The hands of a person who works with them daily develop a toughened layer of skin that allows them to do work that would blister an untrained hand. The callus is not damage, it is adaptation. The body's precise, intelligent response to repeated, controlled stress, building exactly the protection that the specific demand requires. The mind operates by an almost identical mechanism. Repeated, voluntary exposure to controlled discomfort does not damage psychological resilience. It builds it. The specific mechanism is this. Each time you voluntarily choose to continue past the point where your mind first suggested stopping, each time you complete the task your comfort was arguing against, you are not simply accomplishing that single task. You are making a deposit into a reservoir of self-trust that becomes available to you in every future moment where difficulty arrives and the old voice suggests retreat. This is why the specific activity matters less than the principle underneath it. The cold shower, the extra repetition when the workout felt complete, the difficult conversation initiated rather than avoided, the early morning chosen over the extra hour of sleep. None of these activities are inherently transformative. What is transformative is the specific, repeated experience of proving to yourself in a small, controlled, voluntary way that the voice announcing your limit was premature. Every one of these moments is a callus being built, not on the skin, on the specific psychological structure that determines whether you retreat or continue when life, without your permission, demands considerably more than a cold shower or an extra repetition. The mind that has never been calloused meets its first real test without the accumulated evidence that it has, in fact, been here before and survived. The mind that has been calloused deliberately through years of voluntary discomfort meets that same test with a reservoir of specific, hard-won proof that the voice predicting collapse has been wrong every single time before. Chapter 4. The Cookie Jar. There is a specific mental technique that explains almost every act of extraordinary human endurance ever documented. It is deceptively simple, and once understood, it becomes available to you in every future moment where your own capacity is in genuine doubt. The technique is this: when facing a challenge that feels, in the present moment, beyond what you believe you can endure, you do not reach forward toward an uncertain future. You reach backward into a specific, remembered inventory of moments where you already proved, through direct and undeniable experience, that you are capable of more than your current fear is telling you. This is what I call the cookie jar, a mental reservoir built deliberately over time, containing the specific, named, remembered instances where you did the hard thing when every signal suggested you could not. The moment does not need to be dramatic. It does not need to be a documented feat of extraordinary achievement. It needs only to be true. A moment where you know, with complete certainty, because you were there, that you continued past the point where continuing felt possible. The mind in crisis does not respond well to abstract encouragement. Telling yourself you can do this in the middle of genuine difficulty often fails, because the mind, under stress, is looking for evidence, not affirmation. But reaching into the cookie jar, recalling the specific morning you did not want to get up and got up anyway, the specific conversation you were terrified to have and had anyway, the specific loss you did not believe you would survive and did. This is not affirmation. This is evidence. And the mind under duress responds to evidence in a way it will never respond to encouragement alone. Build your cookie jar deliberately, not by waiting for crisis to fill it accidentally, by choosing regularly small voluntary difficulties, specifically so that when genuine difficulty arrives uninvited, you already have a reservoir of proof that the person facing it has done hard things before and is still here. Chapter 5. The Governor and the Goal. We return now to the governor we discussed in the opening chapter, the ancient mental mechanism that announces exhaustion long before true exhaustion has arrived. There is a specific practice that allows a person to work with the governor rather than simply being controlled by it. It is called goal setting through accountability mirrors, though the formal name matters less than the underlying principle. The principle is this: vague goals produce vague effort. A goal that says, "I want to be better," gives the governor an enormous amount of room to declare victory prematurely. Better than what? By when? Measured how? The governor exploits ambiguity. It uses the absence of a specific, measurable standard to convince you that whatever you have already done is sufficient. A specific goal, precise, measurable, written down, reviewed daily, removes this room for negotiation. If the goal is to complete a specific number of a specific action by a specific time, the governor has nowhere to hide. Either the specific action was completed or it was not. This precision is uncomfortable for exactly the same reason the accounting of self-deception in Chapter 2 was uncomfortable. It removes the comfortable ambiguity that allows most people to feel as though they gave their full effort without ever actually testing whether that was true. If you are finding value in what you are hearing today, a like on this video sends it to someone else who needs this same precision in their own life right now. The accountability mirror is simply this. At the end of each day, look honestly at the specific, measurable goal you set that morning. Was it completed in full, exactly as specified? Not approximately. Not with reasonable effort. Exactly as specified. This single practice, maintained with consistency, closes the gap between the life you believe you are living and the life you are actually living. A gap that, for most people, remains permanently invisible because the standard against which they measure themselves was never specific enough to expose it. Chapter 6. Suffering as Information. There is a distinction that determines almost everything about whether difficulty produces growth or produces damage. It is the distinction between suffering that is happening to you and suffering that you have chosen. Involuntary suffering, loss, illness, circumstances outside your control, is not the subject of this chapter. That suffering deserves its own consideration. And this audiobook is not suggesting that all pain is equally available as a tool for growth. But voluntary suffering, the discomfort chosen deliberately within safe and reasonable limits for the specific purpose of expanding what you believe yourself capable of. This suffering carries information. Every rep past the point of comfort tells you something about where your actual limit sits relative to where your mind first reported it. Every early morning chosen over comfort tells you something about the gap between your stated priorities and your actual behavior. Every difficult conversation initiated rather than avoided tells you something about how much of your life has been shaped by the avoidance of manageable discomfort rather than the pursuit of what actually matters. The person who treats voluntary discomfort as information rather than as an enemy to be avoided gains access to a continuous stream of precise, honest data about exactly where they stand. Not where they assume they stand, not where they hope they stand, but where the evidence gathered through direct experience actually places them. This is why physical discipline so often produces psychological transformation that appears, on the surface, disproportionate to the physical activity itself. It is not the exercise that changes the person. It is the specific, repeated experience of choosing discomfort deliberately and discovering again and again that the self who chose it was stronger than the self who was afraid to. Chapter 7. The uncommon amongst uncommon. There is a phrase that describes a specific, rare quality found in a small number of people across every field of human endeavor. The uncommon amongst uncommon. Not simply people who are talented. Talent is common enough. Not simply people who are disciplined. Discipline, while rarer than talent, is still not sufficiently rare to explain the specific quality this phrase is describing. The uncommon amongst uncommon are the people who continue after the talent has been exhausted, after the discipline has been tested past its normal limits. after every reasonable person would have concluded that stopping was not only acceptable, but wise. This quality is not inherited. It is not a genetic gift available only to a fortunate few. It is built through the specific, cumulative practice of everything this audiobook has described. The 40% rule, understood and internalized. The accounting of self-deception, conducted honestly and repeatedly. The mind, calloused through voluntary, controlled discomfort. The cookie jar, built deliberately and drawn upon in genuine moments of doubt. The governor, worked with through specific, measurable accountability. Suffering, treated as information rather than as an enemy. Each of these practices, individually, produces incremental change. Together, sustained over months and years, they produce something that looks, from the outside, like a different category of human being. It is not. It is the same human being who simply refused to accept the first report their mind delivered about where their limits actually were. Chapter 8. The War You Cannot Skip. There is a temptation, especially in a culture saturated with shortcuts and the promise of effortless transformation, to believe that the difficult internal work described in this audiobook can somehow be circumvented. That there is a technique, a hack, a sufficiently clever reframe that allows a person to arrive at genuine psychological toughness without actually doing the specific, uncomfortable, repeated work that produces it. There is not. This is the chapter most people do not want to hear, and the one that separates those who read about change from those who actually become different. The callusing of the mind cannot be outsourced. It cannot be purchased. It cannot be absorbed by listening to an audiobook, however well constructed, however philosophically grounded, however emotionally resonant its language may be. This audiobook can describe the mechanism. It can provide the accurate map of exactly what produces genuine resilience. But the territory itself must be walked by you, specifically in your own life, through your own voluntary, repeated, uncomfortable choices. The war this chapter refers to is not a war against an external enemy. It is the specific, daily conflict between the version of you that wants comfort and the version of you that wants to become something more than you currently are. This war does not end. There is no version of a well-lived, disciplined life in which this conflict is permanently resolved. The difference between the person who is transformed and the person who is not that the war ends for one and continues for the other. It is that one of them has learned to keep showing up for the same daily conflict, deliberately, without requiring that it ever be finally won. Chapter 9. Taking souls. There is a specific quality that emerges in a person who has done this work consistently over a long period of time. It is not arrogance. It is not the performed confidence of someone compensating for genuine insecurity. It is something quieter and considerably more powerful. A specific, unshakable knowledge of exactly what you are capable of because you have tested it. Directly, through repeated, voluntary difficulty, rather than simply believing it because someone told you you should. This knowledge changes how a person moves through every subsequent challenge. Because the mind, when it encounters a new difficulty, is not encountering it without context. It is measuring the new difficulty against an accumulated history of difficulties already faced and already survived. The person who has built this specific history does not face a hard conversation, a professional setback, a physical challenge, or a genuine crisis from a position of uncertainty about their own capability. They face it from a position of accumulated, tested evidence that they have been in hard places before and have found, specifically and repeatedly, that they were capable of more than the moment initially suggested. This is not a permanent state of fearlessness. Fear still arrives. Doubt still arrives. The old voice announcing limitation still speaks every single time a new difficulty presents itself. What changes is not the presence of that voice. What changes is the weight that voice is given, once it is measured against a specific, accumulated body of evidence that says, with the authority of direct experience, "You have heard this voice before. It was wrong then. There is no reason to believe it now." Chapter 10. The Life on the Other Side. We arrive, finally, at the life this entire practice makes available. Not a life free of difficulty. Difficulty is not optional in any life worth living. Not a life in which the mind no longer announces limitation. That voice is a permanent feature of human consciousness, but a life in which that voice no longer has the final say. A life in which the space between what you believe you are capable of and what you are actually capable of has been deliberately, repeatedly, honestly closed. Not through motivation, which fades, but through the specific, cumulative evidence of 1,000 small moments where you continued past the point your mind declared impossible. This life is available to anyone willing to do the specific, unglamorous, daily work described in this audiobook. Not because the work is easy, because the work is available to every person in every circumstance, regardless of talent, regardless of history, regardless of how many times the old voice has been believed in the past. The 40% rule means your current limit is not your actual limit. The accounting of self-deception means you can see clearly exactly where you have been letting yourself off the hook. The callusing of the mind means every voluntary act of discomfort is a deposit into a capacity that compounds. The cookie jar means you are never in any crisis without evidence of your own capability. The governor can be worked with through precision rather than vague intention. Suffering, chosen voluntarily, is information, not an enemy. And the uncommon amongst uncommon are not a different species. They are people who simply continued past the point where the ordinary would have stopped. That is available to you. It has always been available to you. The only question that remains is whether you will continue to listen to the voice that speaks first, or whether you will, starting today, begin building the specific, evidenced, repeatedly tested capacity to hear that voice, acknowledge it, and continue anyway. The sovereign conclusion. You are stronger than the voice that speaks first. This is not a motivational statement. It is a measurable, repeatedly confirmed physiological and psychological fact. The mind announces its limit long before the limit actually arrives, and the space between that first announcement and your true capacity is not empty. It is where an entire life you have not yet lived is waiting. Not a life without difficulty. A life in which difficulty no longer determines who you are. You have everything you need to begin. Not tomorrow, when conditions are more convenient. Not once you feel ready, because the feeling of readiness is itself a decision, not a prerequisite. Today. In the next voluntary discomfort you choose rather than avoid. In the next honest accounting of exactly where you have been letting yourself off the hook. In the next moment, your mind announces that you have reached your limit. And you, having read this, having understood the 40% rule, pause, take one more breath, and continue. Not recklessly, not without wisdom about genuine limits that do exist and deserve respect, but with the specific, hard-won knowledge that the first voice is rarely the true one. Go find the version of you that exists on the other side of comfort. It has been waiting. It has always been waiting. And it is, in every honest sense that matters, more genuinely you than the version that has spent so long listening to the voice that speaks first. Before you go, everything in this audiobook describes how to build extraordinary capacity through the body and through voluntary discomfort. But capacity without direction is simply exhausting motion. The audiobook before this one addressed the other half of this equation, the stillness required to know, with clarity, exactly where this capacity should be pointed. It is called Stillness is the Key. Discipline without stillness produces a person who is strong but directionless. Stillness without discipline produces a person who is calm but stagnant. Together, they produce something considerably more rare. That audiobook is in the description below. They were always two halves of the same practice. One question before you leave: what is the specific, voluntary discomfort you have been avoiding? The one you already know, reading this, you have more capacity for than you have been admitting. Name it in the comments below. Naming it is the first rep, and the first rep is where every uncommon life has ever begun.